In this video, I'm going to introduce you to casting. Casting is the process of converting one data type to another. It allows the programmer to change the variable or value to match the data type for an operation or a requirement. It is beneficial when you need to perform operations that are for specific data types or you need to ensure data compatibility. However, not all casting is possible or meaningful. If I try to convert a string that does not contain a numeric value into a float, it would raise an error, and if I didn't handle that error, it would crash the program. As you can see, I am on the Python Standard Documentation Library website, and if I click on Library Reference and then scroll down just a little bit, there is a link here for built-in functions. I'm going to click on that. And this is the list of all the built-in functions that comes with the Python standard library. And it says the Python interpreter has a number of functions and types built into it that are always available. Now, the functions would be like len for length or print for print, which we've already seen, but it also has types. So range, set, tuple, int, float. These are all types. And to create an object of that type, we could put in the function name for that specific type and pass it a value. And if it can convert that value that we pass it into that data type, it will, and it will return it back to us. So I'm going to click on the type function here. And you'll notice that there is class type that takes a single object and then class type that takes a name, bases, dict, and keyword arguments. We're going to focus on the class type object. And here it says with one argument, which would be this one here, return the type of an object. The return value is a type object and generally the same as the object returned by object dot underscore underscore class underscore underscore. The isInstance built-in function is recommended for testing the type of an object because it takes subclasses into account. Going to jump into my development environment here, and you'll see that I have result equals none, and I am going to output result. So the first thing I'm going to do is replace none with the type function. And in the type function, I am going to pass it the integer value 5, and when I print this out, we'll see that we get the output class int. And if I were to change this to 5.0 and run it, we will get class float. And if I were to enclose this in quotes to make it a string and run this, we'll get class str, which is short for string. So now let's look at some actual data conversions. So I'm going to type in float to call the float function, and I'm going to pass it the value of 5. And what it's going to do is it's going to take this integer value 5 and convert it to a float by adding a decimal to it. So when I run this, I'll get the output 5.0 instead of just a 5. And if I wanted to, I could pass in a string decimal here. So I have 3.14 in quotes. And if I pass this in, it will convert it to 3.14. And if I were to simply print a string out, we would also see it as 3.14. So I'm also going to print an isInstance function call, pass it in my result variable, and it takes a second argument, which is the class that I want to see if the result is an instance of. So in this case, I want to see if it's actually turning it into a float. So I'm just going to type in the class name float here. And when I run this, I'll get my 3.14 and also outputs true because isInstance is returning that it is true that result is now a float. I'm going to go ahead and remove this, and I want to show you that there are some issues that can happen with casting. So if I were to try to convert this 3.14 string to an int by calling the int function and passing this value in, it is going to raise an error. It's saying that it's an invalid literal for int with base 10 3.14. Basically, you cannot pass the string value of a float into the int function because it does not know how to convert the string version of this float into an int. However, I could pass the float function into the int function with this string float here, and it will convert it to a 3 integer just fine. And how this works is the float function first returns the float value 3.14, and then the integer function takes that value 3.14 and converts it into a 3. I could also convert numbers into strings by using the string function. So if I did str and passed it 3.14, when I run this, I get the output down here is 3.14. So let me wrap the result in the type function. So it prints out the type that this is returning. And when I run this, we'll get class str for string. There are also conversions that you can do that are not quite so intuitive. So if I wanted to, I could convert int and pass in the Boolean value true. And when I run this, it's going to print out the value 1. Because when I pass true into the int function, the return is 1. Now, if I passed false into the int function, the result would be 0. And this works the other way too. If I were to call the bool function and pass in the integer value 1, this is going to return true. And if I passed in a 0, this bool function will return false. In the Python language, there is the concept of truthy and falsy, which involves using values here to determine if they are inherently true or inherently false, but that is something that we will go over more once we get to the Boolean section.